everybody. My name is Tamsin, aka also known as Concise One. I'm a local artist, local lyricist, and youth worker. And I'm really happy to be here today with these two amazing individuals, writers and creatives in their own life. And I'd like to welcome you to the Kickstart Your Career in Publishing, Writing and Poetry. Yeah, can we have a round of applause for that? Yeah. Nice. Fantastic. So, we're going to get into it, but we've warmed up a little bit. I'm sure you guys have been listening to us having our conversations. And I just would like, Jacob, introduce Jacob. Jacob, do you want to say hi to them?
Hello.
If I can introduce Sara.
Hello.
So, we're going to get into it. And I think I'm going to start with you, Jacob, if that's okay, Sara. So, Jacob, do you want to tell us a bit about who you are, what you do as a poet, a writer, and an educator?
Yeah, sure. That's pretty much what I do. There you go.
Yep.
Hello. So yes, I'm Jacob. I am a poet, an educator, editor, creative consultant, a range of different things. I'm greedy in terms of the various different roles, creative independent, claim all the titles best as you can. Essentially, I get to write things. I sometimes perform things. And I create spaces for other people to write and perform things. That's kind of a shorthand for what it is that I do. So yeah, travel around the world when we can, now that things are starting to ease, maybe that can start up again. And yeah, aside from my own writing, it's really important for me to support other people. So I run a program called the Barbican Young Poets Program. What's up? I run a few other programs and have developed slam programs for young writers. I used to run the spoken word education program at Goldsmiths. I've been a professor of poetry at Guildhall. Everything in my life is about writing, about poetry, and about supporting other people in terms of doing that work.
Awesome, thank you. So when did you realize you had a passion for writing and for poetry? When did you realize that?
Probably pretty early on. I was a bookish kid. I was that kid who would be like on the side of the football pitch with a head in a book as opposed to kicking things around. So I always had this love of language and this love of words. Not even necessarily the kind of story making and the kind of the building of narrative, but language itself. I was always really heavily invested in that, what it is that you could do with words, right? And I guess the thing for me in that early kind of sense, in terms of, yes, the passion was there, but I didn't really know what it was that I could do with that. I didn't know that I could have a career as a poet, that I could have a career as any of the other things that I do now. It was just this sense of, I really like words. I want to do that. And so I did. Yeah.
I'm going to go straight off, because I'm going to straight off from the question, just ask you, do you remember your first performance of your first written words piece of poetry?
Oh, wow.
How did that feel like to share something you had just been writing and then go on a microphone in front of people and just share that?
I can't remember. There are two experiences that come to mind, and I don't think that they're the experience that you're looking for or thinking about. There's one experience that I had when I was in a band when I was a kid. I in this kind of hip hop. It was kind of like wannabe Roots, basically. Okay. It was like dude on cello, dude on drums, and me doing this kind of lyricist kind of thing at the front. And I just remember this point, I was there just kind of dropping some bars and whatnot. And I was so into it that I hadn't realized that the other musicians I was in the room with, they'd stopped a long time ago, and they were just like, who is this dude? What does he think he's doing? And I was so in it that I just, said it was that. But there was also this other moment of sharing a poem. I was 13 years old, shared this poem that I'd written with someone. I think I'd just read some Seamus Heaney. And I was trying to do the Seamus Heaney thing. I had no idea what it was that he was doing, but I was like, this is cool, I want to do this. So I tried to do this and I shared it with someone and they just didn't get it because obviously what I was writing at that time, it was like so abstract and I didn't know what I was doing. It was just words kind of thrown out into space. But just that, so it's two ends of a scale, right? On the one end, there's this kind of moment of absolute investment and joy and not really worrying about anyone else's appreciation of what it was that you were doing. I was just so in it, I was there for the words. At the other end, it was a much more intimate, direct, kind of one-to-one experience, and that person actually didn't get what it was that I was saying. And that's part of the writer's life as well, right? Dealing with that kind of range, dealing with that scale, that spectrum, I think it's really important for us to be able to appreciate both ends of that.
Yeah, it's awesome. That leads pretty good to the next question, which is when did you realise you wanted to make a career out of this, and could you tell us about the pathway to where you are in your career as a poet now?
It's a fascinating question because I never really thought of what I was doing as a quote unquote career. Right? Everything that I have done largely has been just the evolution of an interest. It's been the growth and development of something that I've been particularly invested in, right? So I was the kid who was the bookish kid who was really interested in words and playing around with language and word music and all that kind of thing. So I went to study. Studied English literature because I had no idea that I could do a creative writing degree. So I did English literature. Came out of that. While I was doing that, kind of went to all of the events that I could and found my way into a local scene and circuit and whatnot. Made connections in that way. And none of the connections that I was making at that point were from a perspective of, I need to build my network. I need to connect with people so I have these connections so I can move on through. It was none of that. It was just, I really love this thing that I found. I want to be there. I want to see everything that's happening through this. So I did some of that. Started performing, got seen, got picked up by an agent who then kind of took my work in various different directions, also got asked to run workshops, so on and so forth. Everything just kind of flowered from that initial investment of, I am here for this. And now I have this career where I'm doing much of that still, but also I'm an editor and doing a range of other things along those lines. It's all just kind of evolved quite organically for me. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So next question. What was your pathway to where you are now in the publishing industry?
That's a really interesting one because, again, it's that notion of evolution and organic growth, the editing that I do. And so I don't even think of myself as being in the publishing industry as such. Even though I am, I don't really think of it in that way because I'm more invested in the work that I do developing the writers that I work with. The industry, yeah, sure, okay, cool, great, wonderful. And it's wonderful to see those writers go on to have the successes that they have. But the reason I'm there is because I want to support the writers that I work with and help them grow and help them find their voices or develop their voices. So my pathway into that was really off the back of having this investment in facilitating and creating spaces for people to be challenged and supported in terms of what it is that they do with their writing. I had connections with an editor at that point, a wonderful human being by the name of Nee Ayuquake Parks, whose name should be celebrated and sung from the heights. He's a fantastic human being in terms of the work that he's done for so many people. He knew what I was doing, and I was kind of pushing a few writers in his direction, writers whose work I believed in, and he said, hey, Jacob, you're working with them already. Come through, support them, do the work. And that's essentially how my role as an editor kind of evolved. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So how difficult was it to get your first job in the publishing?
Yeah, so I mean, nepotism, right? The people you know. So yeah, not that difficult. And it's really important to note. That wasn't me knocking on doors trying to say, I need to put a CV together and apply for this role and this is where I want to be, so I need to make all these applications in different spaces or read these papers and whatever. It was much more a sense of I'm doing a version of this work already. And because I happened to be in a space where I knew other people who were doing similar things, it was relatively easy to say, what might happen if I make that shift from working in this way? And it wasn't even a shift as such, because I still do the facilitation. But what if I kind of expand, let's say, what if I expand what I'm doing to support these people through an editing perspective, as well as the facilitation perspective. So it wasn't necessarily a difficult thing, and that's kind of a terrible thing to say if there's anyone in the audience who's like, how do I get that job? What do I have to do? It just kind of happened for me. So I'm sorry. But yeah, it was that growth. It was knowing the people. It was knowing what it was that I wanted to do, and it was having that genuine investment in the work. Yeah.
Yeah. This idea you kind of said about industry, I know you were sort of in the environment and you were doing things, things were around you. It was almost like you were manifesting the opportunities that were coming towards you because you were in it. As a young writer, if you find that kind of, you're not really on that scene too much, or you want to put your foot in the door, but it's like something is holding you back in a sense, or confidence, or whatever it may be, or ideas about the industry that maybe you don't fit into. You feel like, okay, my writing is a bit different. Maybe it's a bit lyrical. It's a bit, I like talking about other things. What advice would you give a young writer from that standpoint, coming into the industry, like you say, or going to these events, that kind of thing? What advice could you give them in finding their pathway and maybe manifesting those opportunities to come to them to find? What advice could you give them?
There's this, so a couple of things. One, I was having this conversation with a set of young people in Spain just earlier this afternoon. And there was this point that we reached in a conversation where I was saying, one of the things I love about the work that we do is that, the work that we do isn't just literature work, it's like life work, right? So the question you just asked, there's this thought that isn't really an industry thought, it's a life thought. And it's how you kind of split the difference or how you establish the balance between celebrating who you are and what your voice is, what it is that you do, while being willing to grow and learn and be challenged by the world around you, right? And I think it's really important to be able to hold both of those ideas, right? So it's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to take on all of the ideas such to the extent that you become changed and you don't even recognize who you are, right? It's another thing to say, I'm gonna stay true to who I am and thus not shift and not grow and end up stagnating almost in that sense of what your voice is. But I think the ideal is to, again, hold that balance between those two ways of being so that you can grow, so that you can shift, so you can take on all of the learning that exists around you while celebrating what it is that makes your voice unique, while celebrating what it is that makes your voice different. And yeah, if anything, I would land on that as a thought.
That's awesome. I think that was a round of applause. Interesting.
Thank you.
So, final question for you, Jacob. What do you enjoy most about your work?
Enjoy? Who says I enjoy my... No, no, just there are so many things. I get to see people grow. Yes, there's my own work, there's my own writing, there's the kind of grappling with language, which I'm still that kid. I'm still that bookish kid who just loves words, right? But the other part of my work, which is kind of integral, it's all connected, being able to see people grow. This Barbican Young Poets program that I referenced, I've been running for 13 years now. As a poet who runs programs, poets who do this kind of work, we don't often get to be in the same position for that kind of time. We might do like the one-off workshops here and there, right? Having had the opportunity to run the same program for 13 years, I've had this amazing opportunity to see people grow in terms of what it is that they can do with language, with words, with their self-expression. There's a story I keep telling that some people will be bored of by now about the first roundhouse poet that I ever worked with, who was Tyrone Lewis. Met him when he was 13 years old, saw him come through the door. he didn't even come for a poetry workshop. He came for like animation or something like that, and animation was full. So they were like, maybe you might like the poetry. And I should point out, there was no one in the poetry workshop at that point. I was sitting there just twiddling my thumbs, waiting for someone to come in. And they kind of walked Tyrone in, and he was the one person who came through the door, and they were like, yeah, he didn't actually come for poetry. He came for the animation, but animation is full, we can't send him home. So, hey Tyrone, hey Jacob, go to it. And, you know, by the end of the day, he had called a friend, and there were 2 people in the room. The next day we had 5 people. By the end of the week, we had like 13, 15 people or something like this. And that was however many years ago. Tyrone Lewis is now making documentaries about poetry and spoken word, and has his own collection out in the world. And, you know, just that opportunity to see people grow and create spaces for people to really challenge their sense of what's possible for themselves and with their own creative expression. That's the joy. That's where the joy is.
Definitely. Amazing. Thank you, Jacob.
Hey.
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause for Jacob. Thank you so much, Jacob. So now we're going to go to Sara. Hi, Sara.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming as well. So your first question I have for you, could you tell me a bit about your career as a writer and a publisher?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of as a writer, so my debut novel came out last year called The Mismatch with Penguin.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Round of applause.
And my second book will be coming out next year, so
Okay.
that's very exciting. And yeah, that's kind of like, I kind of write short stories as well. So I was in Who's Loving You, which came out in paperback this year of Trapeze, which is 10 short stories by women of colour. That's love stories. So that's really cool as well. But in terms of my work as a publisher, I work at Penguin Random House Children's as an editor. So yeah, I kind of work from 6+, all the way from like young fiction to kind of YA and crossover, and I work across fiction and non-fiction as well. So that's kind of the work I do.
Awesome. Do you find those 2 jobs? I know we had a brief chat earlier. Is one more taxing than the other, or you find it cool to go between the 2?
I think they're both equally taxing, I'll be honest, but I think it's nice to go between the 2, and it is 2 different sides of your brain. Like editing someone else's book is very different from editing your own, I think, because you can be more critical of someone else's work than you can with your own. So I think, yeah.
You're very good to be able to do that, definitely. When next question, when did you realise that you wanted to be an author?
I think when I was like very young, I read like Animal Arc as like, well, I was like 7 years old or something, and I was like, oh, I want to be an author. Then I actually was like, actually, it looks quite hard, so maybe not, I won't do that. But when I was a teenager, I lived in Hull, and we moved to Brighton when I was like 15 or 16. So it's quite a lonely 2 years, because I think the culture is just very different in these 2 cities. I didn't have any friends, to be honest, so I was kind of like, what should I do with my like time? And I kind of was very into Twilight, I'll be honest. So I decided like I'll write like a Muslim Iranian version of that. So I kind of I ended up writing a novel like when I was like 15, 16. And it didn't go anywhere, but like I just really enjoyed it. Like I didn't tell anyone about it, and I just kind of powered through it. And I also wrote like fan fiction and things like that. It wasn't something I took seriously, but like I really enjoyed it. And I think then is when I knew like it was something I wanted to do. Like not necessarily even for a career, but it's just something that I thought I'd do like in my spare time. So that's kind of where like it kind of began, I think.
You got lost in it almost. Yeah, it took you away.
Yeah, and I think that's when writing is most fun, is when you're not thinking someone's going to read it or I'm going to send it to an agent. It's when you're just thinking like, I'm going to write like a fun scene today. And
It's like escapism, right?
Yeah, definitely.
You can create new worlds.
Definitely.
Okay, next question. Could you tell us a bit about your pathway and getting into the work of publishing and sort of where you are now?
Yeah, so in terms of like my career, like it wasn't because I know you were saying it was quite easy to get into kind of publishing.
For me.
Yeah, for you.
Yeah, not for everyone. I acknowledge that. Yes.
I think mine was I found it very, very tough to get into publishing, I'll be honest. So I always knew I wanted to get into publishing, and I did so much work experience at college and at uni. Like every year I did those like unpaid work experiences. But when I came out of uni, I just couldn't get a job. Like I had 20, I'm not exaggerating, 20 interviews at all these. I shared at Penguin, all of them. And I'd get to like maybe the first round or the second round and I just would never get a job. And that went on for like 2 years, I think. So it was quite grueling. And I ended up working, not to be discouraging, but I can give some tips if that's helpful for what like helped. But I ended up working at a law publisher, which was like law journals. It's like business to business type thing. And that wasn't fun at all. Like it was like a sales job, and I had to like ring lawyers and ask to try and like get them to buy these journals, and they're quite rude, so it wasn't very fun at all. But it was interesting to get an insight into the industry from a like one perspective at least. Then I ended up creating like my own magazine, which features like underrepresented artists and writers, and it was like a thing I did in my spare time. And it's because I saw like at that time, I think it was like 2016, and like publishing was even worse than it is now in terms of like representation, and there were always panels about it, and it was just getting frustrating. So I kind of thought, oh, maybe I'll make my own magazine and see kind of what happens. And I ended up creating a magazine, and I think that really helped career-wise as well. So like I created a print magazine, and then I went to an interview, and I kind of mentioned it to them, and they were like really interested. So I think maybe having like a bit of something extra kind of did help in that regard, like showing that I am interested in publishing, like beyond the regular way of being interested in publishing, if that makes sense.
You think all that experience you had of sort of going back and forth in those 2 years, the magazine kind of was birthed, that was like your form of resilience?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I think I tried to like publish people who like, I don't know, like maybe had something in them but weren't properly polished, so I could kind of also like practice like my editorial skills on them, or just show voices that are a bit different. So I think that really helped. And yeah, my first job that I did get was at Mills and Boon, which is part of HarperCollins, like the romance publisher.
My mum used to read that.
Which was really fun actually, because so Mills and Boon is like a romance publisher, and they publish I think like 30 or 40 books a month. Ridiculous. So from a very early like, editorial assistant, you are editing books very quickly on, so it is good to get like hands-on experience. So that was good.
That's amazing. 30 to 40 books.
Yeah, because like they have like series, and there'll be like 8 series, and each one has like 8 books, or like 4 to 8 books a month they publish, so it's very like high volume. But yeah, I work at Penguin Children's now. I'm not actually clarified where I work now, but yeah, I worked at Mills and Boon for 2 years, and then I moved over to Penguin Children's.
How do you find doing children's books? Is it exciting? Is this range of stories that you get coming in?
Yeah, it's really exciting because, like I was saying, you work from like young fiction. So, like today, I was editing like an animal book for like an illustrated animal book about like this detective duo. It's like a little deaf girl and her like dog, and they do like mysteries together, like solve them, which is really cute. But then also like I'll also do like maybe like essay collections. So I acquired Black Joy, which was edited by Charlie Brunkhurst Cuff. So I kind of could edit that with her. So like you do a real range. Like it could be from like basically crossover adult to young fiction and the middle grade and kind of everything in between, which is cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question. I think I might ask you, how did you start out in the publishing industry? Was it difficult for you to get your first job? I think you kind of answered that.
Basically it was quite difficult.
I think you kind of went there already. So what do you enjoy most about the work you do? I know you said the book that you put out, was that about romance? Was it about...
Yeah, it was kind of a romance. It's kind of a coming of age more than a romance, but I think, like, to be honest, like how publishing works is they kind of put you in a genre, I think, to be honest, because it is kind of like it goes in the past in 1970s Iran, which is where like my family are from, and you see like a young girl like navigating like the revolution and her like being like a 21-year-old, and it kind of parallels with a girl in South London at 21 when she graduates and how she kind of navigates things. So it has got a romance element as well to that. But yeah, I really enjoy kind of the writing aspect of like my job, and kind of just hearing, I guess, readers relating to the character, because in the book I kind of explore like virginity, like being British Muslim, and kind of like being in the UK today and things like that. And I kind of wrote it because I wrote a Galdem article a while back about virginity. And I remember loads of people, boys and girls, messaged me to say like they really related to kind of like having like, I guess like a double life and not knowing whether they wanted to lose their virginity and things like that. And like I had the sheer volume of people messaging me made me think maybe I need to write something more about this. So yeah, with my like debut novel, like I get messages from people who say like it feels like their life is copied and pasted. So someone said once, and I was like, that's very touching. So that's like the best part of the job, is when people like just relate to the things you're saying.
And it touches them, and they connect with it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's like the world you've created. Someone finds a home there, and like, I'm seen.
Yeah, they finally see themselves. That's really nice.
Exactly.
Feeling. Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. Let's give a round of applause to Sara, please. Amazing. Okay, so I think it's at this point that we ask you guys if you have any questions.
It's for Sara. I think it's like quite interesting with regards to what you're saying about like writing from perspectives of people that are underrepresented in literature. And I remember reading that I think it was in Northwest in NW. She never put in the characteristics of any character that was a person of colour, only white people, and I thought it was like really interesting, like making us the norm rather than the other. And I just wondered if like that's something that you like to do, like moving forward, like with your writing, and if that's something that you wanted to reflect in your writing, that like just being an Iranian girl was just the norm, and like the whole setting was just the norm, and this was your life.
Yeah, definitely. I think in my writing, that's kind of what I try to implement, especially with other characters as well. Like I think in my book there are other characters from different races, and maybe like you'll notice if you're like an author or like copy editors will try and say like, oh, I didn't know that this person was black, can you write that in there? And you're like, no, actually, I'm not going to write that in there. You don't need to, it doesn't need to be like that. And also with my editing as well, like I might encourage some of my authors, they might like, you know, like specify the skin colour, but they don't specify for the white characters. So I kind of either say maybe specify for the white characters as well that their skin is white or whatever, or pink or whatever, but like, so just make it equal throughout, and especially for children's books, I think. That, and a lot of my authors are quite clued into that as well, which is really good. It's kind of showing that we're talking about it more, where they are quite aware that, like, you know, keep it kind of equal, like everyone's skin colour's mentioned, or it's not all. So, yeah, so not make white the default, basically. Yeah, definitely.
In terms of being slightly older and kind of getting those opportunities, I think a lot of things I'm seeing now are for a lot of younger, should we say, and I still kind of need a day job. My background is I'm an educator, but what kind of opportunities are there for people who kind of want to pursue something that's quite creative but still kind of hold down something that pays the rent, basically? So, yeah.
I mean, wow, that's a really interesting question to ask just in terms of the broad scope of it. Firstly, I would say I celebrate that notion of having to maintain a life while trying to develop or build a kind of creative career. Yeah, I think that more needs to be said about that. There are so many young people that I've worked with who have the notion of a career aspiration, and they've been perhaps sold a story, sold a way of thinking about those career aspirations without some of the reality of those careers that they aspire to. So I think it's really important to underline what it is that you've spoken about there, both in terms of, yes, the balance of, hey, I have to pay rent and put food on the table, as well as whatever time it takes to do this other creative work, but also in terms of the very real age kind of issue whereby there's funding that's put forward for people up to a certain age. And once you hit, so there's like an 18 to 25, 26 kind of bracket for like publishing things and workshop things and whatnot. Yeah, there are kind of younger programs and whatnot that you can get involved in. But, you know, once you hit kind of 25, 26, it's like, yeah, of course, you're fully formed now. You've got all the money you need. You should be in the industry, but that's it. You don't need anyone else's support. And of course, it doesn't work like that. I think there is some work happening along those lines. And there are a lot of people who run programs who are really invested in trying to make a difference on that front. So, for example, with Barbican Young Poets, we just this year, I've been trying to push this for many years now, but we just this year were able to shift from a kind of top end of 26 to open the program out right up until 30. It's something, it's not everything, and there's more work that needs to be done on that front. I don't think there's an easy answer. Sorry, this is a really long answer to the question. Let's just do this for the rest of the evening. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think that partly we need to be aware of the provenance of like where the money comes from for some of those programs and how it's directed in different ways. In terms of the practicality of the question you asked, are there various different programs? Yes, there are tons, but it's kind of difficult to reference specific programs in this moment for that specific need. Cool, yeah.
Cool. Do we have any more questions? Yep.
I have a question. Have you ever, at some stage in your career, you feel like you're at a wall or you're facing quite significant obstacles that you feel quite hard to overcome it, and what kind of mental process or like rituals you have done with your life or adjusting with your life to help you to power through it, or what the factor contribute to that you actually find the hope at the end of the tunnel in some ways. It's for both.
I'm trying to think of a specific example of myself. But
Okay.
I did, with my job and writing, at one point I hit a block in which I was like, I can't do both. Then I ended up taking a 6-month sabbatical and that helped. So I mean, that's quite an extreme, but I think basically what I'm trying to say is like, I think sometimes it's okay to have a break and not try and keep going with something if it's not working for you. Like, I think your mental health is very important. If something's just not working, my advice would be, instead of trying to push on, just to give yourself a break and allow yourself not to do much. Like during the sabbatical, I did write, but I also just went to the gym and just kind of like had coffees. Like I enjoyed myself, and I think that's fine. I came back really refreshed and like ready to go. So I think having a break would be my advice.
Yeah, I celebrate that. There's so much that kind of resonates in that. Firstly, there are many different walls. Yeah, whether that's the kind of wall of how am I relating to the work that I'm doing, what is it that I'm actually trying to do with this work, what is my voice, how has my voice evolved, to some of the points that were raised earlier in terms of, is my voice recognized in these other spaces that I'm trying to find a way into, what work needs to be done that's not just about me, but that's actually about the spaces that I'm trying to enter. There are so many different walls that we can hit, yeah? Love that notion of that notion of taking a break and not necessarily continuing to push forward. And I think that's kind of, there's a really, how shall I say, frustrating answer to the notion of the block or the writer's block, or however it is that we choose to define it, in terms of either A, you are pushing forward through it, and sometimes it's a matter of not judging yourself about what it is that you are attempting to do. So sometimes we have those blocks because we are evaluating what it is that we're putting forward. And we're saying, oh, what I'm doing is not good enough. So I must be terrible. And that's where the block comes from. And sometimes we need to kind of step out from that and just continue. And this is the powering through, continuing to do the work without the judgment, right? And sometimes that can be really useful for us. And sometimes we need to take that step back. We need to say, okay, I need to put my notion of productivity in this arena or in this context to one side for a moment and just take a break. And I think that's the kind of like the dark matter of the work that we do. We see the effort, we see the doing. Yeah, and of course, everyone's supposed to be writing every day. If we're serious writers, got to do X amount of hours alongside trying to eat and do the work and all that kind of thing, right? Got to do the work every single day, otherwise I'm not a serious writer. Actually, the work can look like taking a walk. The work can look like spending an afternoon in the Tate or some other gallery or whatever. The work doesn't always have to be necessarily, how am I going to break myself with this piece of writing that I'm trying to do? Yeah? And I think it's really important for us as creatives to acknowledge the fact that the work manifests itself in a range of different ways. And again, sometimes that's where we can not break through the block, but that's where we can account for and acknowledge what it is that perhaps the block is trying to tell us. Yeah? Actually, maybe you need to acknowledge that there are different forms of work that can be done. And maybe sometimes you just don't need to work for now. Yeah? And it's okay. You are not bad. I mean, as writers, I'm getting on my soapbox now. I'll say again. As writers, many of us feel as if we have something to prove, right? If you've had to kind of justify your decision to be a writer, if you've said, okay, I'm going to be a writer, and you've got people around you saying, what does being a writer actually mean? I grew up in a family whereby the notion of success and stability was doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant, any of those other jobs that we might recognize, yeah? You say, I'm going to be a writer, how are you going to eat? How are you going to put a roof over your head? So you kind of taking that sense of, yes, I'm going to be a writer, straight away, you're always feeling as if like you have to prove yourself in some way. I have to justify this decision I've made, right? And I think sometimes we need to let ourselves off the hook for that, and maybe sometimes that's where the block comes from.
Bearing in mind that you both have such amazing styles and creative voices in your own right with your own work, how does it work then when you put your publishing and editing hat on? Where's the line with your style and tone, and so what's the nitty-gritty of what you're trying to do with the writers that you're working with, and do you have long discussions with them about what they're trying to achieve, etc.?
Yeah, that is quite interesting. I think we do have discussions with the authors definitely beforehand, and I think, especially like I guess with children's publishing, their writing is just so different to mine, and like, you know, you'll have like literary like YA, or you'll have like very commercial young fiction, so it's kind of, they're very different in themselves. But I think you'll have a discussion with the author, and I guess I kind of get a sense of what they're trying to achieve with their writing. So like I think as you read it, you'll kind of know you'll make your edits basically work with their writing. Like I'd never put what I would want to do as a writer to them. It'll be more like, what is the story? Like what is the pitch, which is something you use in publishing a lot, is like the one-line pitch of the book, which is like basically the heart of the story. And I'll be thinking about how we can kind of bring that out more and make it as most impactful as possible, and how we can make the plot as impactful. So I'll be thinking for each book individually rather than thinking like of my own voice and kind of how I would do it. That's kind of like, yeah, what I would do.
Yeah. We are so simpatico. For me, I never want the writers that I'm working with to sound like me, right? And again, I'm a poet, right? And I'm working with poets, so it's very easy. I mean, everything we do is filtered through that notion of who we are and how we see the world and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, if I'm teaching or facilitating or whatever, that's all going to be coming out through the lens of my own particular poetics. Yes, great, wonderful. But I try to maintain a very concrete awareness of that. And it's always very much about, hey, look, this is what I'm seeing here, but you are the author. So let's have a conversation about how it is that we progress. I want to challenge you and I want to push your voice to see how far we can go with this body of work, but always you are the author. You ask any of the poets that I've worked with and they will tell you, yes, there are specific moments where I've had that conversation with them where I've said, you are the author here. It's not me, it's not about me as editor who knows better than you. It's about, here's what I'm seeing. Let's talk. Let's have this conversation. And where's the space for us to draw your voice out away from whatever it is that I'm pushing in that direction. Yeah. Oh, and thank you for celebrating our style and voices, by the way. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Awesome. Any more questions?
It's lovely to hear from both of you. I was just thinking, most of the roles, at least that I've seen in the industry, generally, if you want one, you have to have had a fair bit of experience in advance, or you have to have qualifications. You know, that you have to have gone to uni, you have to have gotten your bachelor's or your master's. You have to have had something, and if you don't have those, the opportunities are closed to you. And I just wondered what advice you have for people who don't have those. You know, if you haven't gone to university or you don't have 5, 6, 10 years of experience, but you still want to get your foot in the door, really.
Can I just say, I really love what it was that you put forward earlier in terms of that notion of the magazine that you made, and how that was you doing the work, even if it wasn't like recognized within an industry sense, like if it was not like a published thing by some other publisher and whatnot, it was still doing the work. Yeah. And I would celebrate that to the hilt in terms of, again, the way that I did things. I did things. I didn't wait for someone to hire me to do something. The way that I was picked up as an editor was, yes, because I had a connection with someone who ran a publishing company, but also that person knew what it was that I was good for, knew that I was capable of doing that work for everything that I'd done prior to that point. So for me, it was about putting that investment of time and effort and energy in, even if it wasn't in a formal role within that capacity. And again, for me, with the way that I was working, it wasn't about career. So I was just doing it because I love to do it. But I was able to put that forward as experience in my context. Yeah.
And I was going to say, I'm not sure. I don't know if this is correct, but I know that some publishers have changed the rules in which you don't need to have a university degree. I think Penguin is one of them, potentially. I should know, but I'm not quite sure. But one of them has definitely done it. There are some schemes as well. Like I know Penguin has a scheme. I think they take about 4 people on where you don't need any like qualifications or anything. And they're just looking for someone who's like really passionate about publishing, and you go through like, I think every like 3 months or something, you change like different imprints, and kind of you see the full range of things within 18 months. So there are like some schemes. But I'd also recommend, like, depending on what area of publishing you want to get into, I don't know, you can create like maybe a blog or something. So even a blog where you sometimes review some books that you're quite into, or I don't know, kind of engaging with the industry in a way that you can kind of put in a covering letter to show you're passionate. Because I don't actually think you need the degree, really. Like, I don't know why you'd need, I don't even know, like the things that I do, I'm not necessarily sure why a degree would help me do this, because you actually learn on the job. And there's something else I was going to say about it, I can't remember what it was now. But essentially, yeah, I think just if you do extra things on the side, that will really help. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any of your question? Any other questions?
This is a question more like as an aside. Like if I didn't go to university, but I did an apprenticeship, and usually if you haven't gone to university, you can do an apprenticeship, or like if your university degree is in something that's not what you want to do your apprenticeship in, there's a great company called Creative Access, and they do a lot of work with people who are underrepresented in creative industries, and there's a lot of publishing jobs on there, I've noticed as well. So yeah, try Creative Access and see if you can get an internship with them.
Yeah, they do really good stuff.
That was awesome. You see community?
Hey.
You see building worlds, creating worlds, having conversations.
Community works, yeah.
Yo.
I wanted to ask, especially when it comes to poetry, how important it is to have things published. So whether it's like magazines or like a pamphlet or something, I'm just a little bit confused about where that would go in a kind of career, or where that comes in when you're trying to start out in the industry.
Kind of depends on what your vision for your career actually is. So if you're trying to build a career that, you know, if you're looking to be picked up by one of the most recognized traditional publishers, so on and so forth, then yeah, you do the kind of let me submit work to magazines and journals, get published in that way, make sure that I'm recognized in those kinds of ways and whatnot. There are a range of other poets, very successful poets, who haven't taken that road, however. You've got start getting on my soapbox again. So poetry is a sector in itself, and there are ways in which we can start speaking to a career within that sector. But I also think that there are some really exciting things that happen when we think beyond that sector, when we think about what poetry can do beyond the world of poetry, right? So there are some really fantastic poets who are doing work in galleries and exhibition spaces and building like careers for themselves as resident artists in architectural settings, and you know, using their art to speak of the world. So this is why I kind of put it back to you in that sense of what's your vision for your poetic career or your career as poet, right? Yes, there is a way in which publishing in journals and submitting to competitions and whatnot helps to raise an awareness of the work that you're doing and can stand as kind of credits that you can point towards, particularly if you're going for, you know, again, further publishing opportunities, to be able to say this body of work has a number of poems that have been published here, and here. Here are all my kind of acknowledgements and credits and whatnot. Great, wonderful, yes, sure. But the career that you want to build for yourself might not necessarily need, in the same way that Sara was just saying, you know, for the work that I'm doing, I learned on the job and didn't necessarily need a degree to do this kind of work. Depending on what your vision is for the work that you want to do, you might not necessarily need those specific kinds of credits. Yeah?
But I just want to, I've been writing and I'd like to do my own publishing for myself, but I don't know how to start with, like how to publish it out there.
Okay.
I'm going to be really irritated and annoying. I apologise. Why do you want to self-publish?
Because I want to do my own creative book myself, like to save basically money.
I always ask that question when I start speaking with people who want to self-publish, and it's not to prevent anyone from self-publishing. It's just to kind of raise the awareness of actually to do it properly, it can be quite a bit of work to self-publish, right? Yeah, sure, you can put a body of work together and, there are so many different platforms now that will allow you to like send a PDF in and get some kind of print-on-demand digital publishing kind of thing, right? You could literally go to a printer's and say, okay, here's my Illustrator document or my whatever in a kind of desktop publishing program. Here's the document, here's the file, can you just print this in the appropriate format for you? There are so many different ways of making that happen, but if you really believe in that work and you really want to see the best for that work, having some support or some advice in terms of the various different parts of that journey, like how it is you actually put a document together, what the requirements of that document actually are, how it is you go about ensuring that book exists somewhere on a platform for distribution, how it is that you then go about, sorry, this is not to like get down, it's just like, here are some various different points, right? How it is that you, ensure that there is some kind of way of distributing that particular publication, how it is that you manage marketing for that publication. All of those various different points, there's a lot of work to do there. And the question is then, are you down for that work? And if you are, I salute you, do that thing, get to it, yeah? If you are like, actually, I'm more the writer stroke creative type person, and it would be fantastic to have more support for doing these other parts of it, then yeah, it might be a matter of looking towards a small publisher and saying, here is a body of work that I really want to put forward, and making some submissions along those lines. And it's like, there's no dishonor in either of those paths. There are some people who will look down on self-publishing and say, oh, you just self-published, that means you weren't really published. No, that's not true. By the same token, there are other kind of independently minded thinking people who will say, oh, you're trying to sell your work to this publisher? Oh no, do it yourself. Yeah. That's not necessarily true. It's a matter of what works best for you. What works best for what you need to do and what you feel you want to focus on. Yeah?
I would agree with that as well.
Yeah.
Actually, I guess if you were self-published, there's a lot more money you'd have to put out rather than if you went through like a publisher or like a small press.
Yeah.
Because I guess you'd have to pay for the book cover, doing the designing yourself, trying to put it on Amazon, like all that kind of stuff. But I don't know like what your journey is like, but I mean, I would suggest, like as Jacob was saying, like maybe submitting to some people and getting some feedback. Some people, like, it might be really helpful just to get some feedback from people.
Yeah.
Like if everyone's like really keen for your work, then that'll give you a push to kind of maybe go for like a traditional publisher. But I think there's definitely things online about how to self-publish. I think it's definitely achievable too, but it would require a lot more effort, basically, on your part.
And if you are looking, if off the back of this conversation, you start thinking, oh, they said have a look at a small publisher. Okay, cool, let me go there. Take some time to read the contracts that are sent in your direction. If someone says, yeah, sure, we'll publish your work, great, fine, wonderful. Yeah. Just make sure that works. Okay, so A, make sure it works in your favor, but B, also take time out to understand that many small publishers are doing that work for the love. They're not really, many of them aren't actually making a great deal of money off the back of what it is that they're doing. So just kind of bearing some of those variables in mind, and maybe once you get a contract, taking that in. So you've got the literary consultancy, you've got a range of different organizations that you can refer to, you've got different literature development agencies. You've just in Deptford, in the Albany, you've got you've got Spread the Word, literature development agency, Apples and Snakes, if anything you're doing is kind of poetry related. Just like literally on our doorstep right here, there are a few different organizations that could point you in the right direction in terms of specific advice around, okay, either, yeah, this contract looks sound, or here's somewhere to go to get some advice on this contract that you've just been given.
Yeah.
Don't just sign off on a contract with someone who says, hey, yeah, we will publish your work. There's this way, if you've never been published before and someone says, yeah, cool, we want to publish you, you're like, oh my goodness, someone wants to publish me? Great, wonderful, yeah, take my work. Yeah, don't do that. Take your time, make sure it works. Yeah.
You mentioned small presses. I was just wondering, how do you find them? Like, what are the best avenues to go down to look for a small press?
Rise and Artist Yearbook.
Mm.
Yeah. Long-running publication, definitely worth looking into. There are also small publishers fairs. For the life of me, I cannot now, off the top of my head, name a specific one, but there are a few different small publishers kind of fairs and kind of like conventions and things where lots of small publishers will come together to kind of present the works that they're pushing out and whatnot. So looking out for some of those kinds of events as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, I'm going to stop the questioning there because I've been a bit of a bad host and missed out 2 questions I was meant to ask the both of you. So this is the last 2 questions, and I think after this we'll sort of close, and I think we can have a networking and discussion and stuff like that. And I'm sure Jacob and Sara will call if you have a burning question at the end, I wouldn't mind. But the 2 questions that I had for you guys was, what advice would you give your younger you, and what do you think you have learned on your journey? So either of you can go first. Younger you.
Do you want me to get I think linking back to what I said before, with my experience trying to get into publishing and everything, I think I would just not rush as much. I think we don't need to. If something's not what I feel like I thought, if I didn't have a publishing job in my early 20s, like I'd failed because everyone around me seemed to have jobs, like office jobs. Whereas like to begin with, I was working at like a clothes shop for a year, and I was kind of just feeling very like, when am I going to have an office job, that kind of thing. But now I'm in my late 20s, I'm kind of like, well, I should have just like relaxed a bit more, because once you get into a job, like you are in a job, like you're not really going to then not be in the job for a few years. Like you just kind of stuck into an office job for the rest of your life. So I feel like I'd just chill out a bit more, basically, is what I'd give my younger self. And I think I'd be a bit more engaged in publishing beyond just liking books. Like I think it's quite difficult because publishing is so hard to get into and everybody loves reading. But that's kind of like, sadly, it's not enough. I think you need to kind of like maybe look at like the bookseller, for example, or book brunch, and kind of be more engaged in like, I guess like the sales and just like what's working in publishing and kind of, like the different roles in publishing, and kind of also kind of what themes are working at the minute, like who is on the top 10, like like, you know, the charts at the minute. Just knowing these things, I think really helps you, give you an edge, and also just is quite interesting to know about as well. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
I love everything that you just said. I love that notion of, and this is probably something I would say to my younger self as well, I love that notion of challenging your notions or definitions of what success is. It's very easy for us, you know, it's life stuff, right? You kind of, you're growing up and you're starting to build that career, or starting to build something that maybe looks like a career. And the people that you've grown alongside have these different kind of life milestones that they're hitting. And again, if you're a creative or you're building a career that's maybe a non-traditional path, you're building something for yourself. Those life milestones might happen at different points. They might not even happen in the same way at all. And I think kind of getting kind of comfortable with that in some way, or appreciating and acknowledging that, takes a lot of pressure off the self, right? In terms of what success actually means. So yeah, challenging that notion of success, celebrate that to the hilt. And also that notion of you can start something without necessarily knowing whether the end point is. You don't necessarily have to have the destination in mind before you begin the journey, which is kind of counterintuitive advice, you know. But yeah, I think that has been the way that I've lived, really. That's how it is that I've kind of arrived at where it is that I am now. If I went back in time and told my teenage bookish self that I would be traveling to Singapore and South Africa and Chicago, and working in Chicago in schools with amazing Chicagoan poets, and taking sets of kids out to Chicago to experience the slam scene in Chicago and all that kind of stuff, and building things in Malaysia. And if I told my teenage self that that's what I was going to be doing as a result of my interest in language and words, my teenage self would probably have slapped my older self. Like, nah, get out of here. But yeah, that is kind of what I've done. So yeah, I didn't have that destination in mind, but it through the investment, through putting some life into what it is that I felt was important to me, good things have happened. I think that is also really important, that whole sense of living the thing. Again, I'm very much aware of the way that we can get into these kind of tips and things, right? This whole sense of, in order to get into the industry, we have to, do all the networking and be, it's like, let's not think of it from that perspective. If you're in it, then you'll find your way to those things. You'll do those things quite naturally, right? It's like, don't think about the hacks or the tools and techniques that you need to engage with in order to kind of magic your way into the path. It's like, live the thing. Live the thing. And you'll end up doing some of those things that we think are good things to do anyway. Yeah.
Cool. Final question. What is the pay like? It's about the money. It's all about the money. What is the pay like?
Why are we leaving this to the last question?
I was building you up, you see. I was building up because I was going to bring it to the money. It's all about the money.
It's all about the money, right?
It's all about the money, you see. How did you manage starting to where you are now? Yeah? And so question is, what is the pay like in the industry? How did you manage starting out to where you are now? How did you manage starting?
Do you want to take this one first?
By manage, do you mean like how do we like survive? Or
Financially.
Just
It's about the money, you see. Tell us.
I guess I can be frank. I mean, the pay bands are on a lot of websites for publishing anyway, so it's not like I think my first law publisher job I was on 21,000, which felt very exciting at the time. And then I think when I went to Mills and Boon, I was on 20,000. And then when I went to Penguin as an assistant editor, I was on 24. I think. Now I'm on 31 as an editor. In terms of how did I manage it, I was quite lucky in that the first flat I lived in London afterwards was very cheap rent. So that was quite simple, and I managed to save up. And I also did a scheme with Spread the Word, in which it's a long-winded scheme, but it's called like Flight 1000. They gave us basically like a bursary each month, and there was me and two other girls who also work in publishing now, and we kind of basically just did our own online magazine on the side, and we got money, so that kind of really helped with like the low salary. But yeah, it's quite difficult. You don't manage to save, but because I do writing on the side, that is my savings. It's like the writing money.
Side hustle.
And in terms of like how much you make as an author, that really does depend.
Yeah.
Some authors earn $4,000 a book. Some will be £1 million. So it really, I would say the average in like a traditional publisher is like 10 to 20 grand a book. I would say that is the average. Earn $4,000 a book. Some will be £1 million. So it really, I would say the average in like a traditional publisher is like 10 to 20 grand a book. I would say that is the average. But
a book per book.
Yeah, per book. And then you get that in like 3 or 4 installments. But that's like a traditional, like a Penguin, a
And
shirt.
that's not poetry.
No, this is like fiction. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't. Poetry. Yeah, you don't get into poetry and that side of poetry with the intention of making your riches. Let's just say that. So for me, again, being really frank, I still remember somewhere, I still have my last pound, which was a point that I got to where I'd kind of given up some of the other work that I was doing, and I kind of went full tilt into just being poet, facilitator and whatnot. I got to that point where, this is my last pound. I don't know what happens after this. Somewhere I've kept that, somewhere I've got that. It's not easy. It's not necessarily an easy life. Whatever it is about the way that my mind works, I've always been comfortable with the notion, and much more comfortable than otherwise actually, about working for myself and being this kind of independent kind of person. And even the work that I do as an editor for Flip to Eye is very much kind of self-directed and self-led. I'm less of an employee, so to speak, and more someone that works with or alongside. As a result, my salary kind of varies, but I am comfortable. Let's say that. I no longer have to look towards my last pound. So yeah, it really does vary. But yeah, bottom line, I would say it is possible for poets to have fantastic high-earning careers. It is possible. That's not why we do it. It is possible. You will sometimes hear tales of people getting booked to do like Halifax commercials, being set up for their entire year's worth of existence, or the next 2 years even, off the back of that one commission, right? It can happen. It will not happen for everyone. And is not something that you can just like kind of, again, work your way into necessarily. So yeah, it really does vary.
Thank you. So that's the end of this evening. How are we for time? What's the time? What time? We've got half an hour. Okay, so we're going to now move into half an hour of networking. Please feel free to come and speak to us if you would like some burning questions or something just popped in your head while you've been speaking. But thank you for being a lovely audience and for all your brilliant questions. And we appreciate your presence and participation. And yeah, thank you guys. Round of applause for you.